I used to think dreams had an age limit, that somewhere between raising children, folding laundry, and watching the years slip quietly through my fingers, my right to dream had expired. My name is Laura, and I turned 54 last spring in a small pine-scented suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. The kind of town where people still wave at their mailman and gossip about who forgot to mow their lawn. My house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, where the air smells like rain most of the year, and life moves in gentle circles. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far stories like mine can travel. My story began in the corner of our garage. Not the most glamorous place, I know. Between boxes of old toys and Mark's fishing gear, I set up a little table and started making hand-poured candles. At first, it wasn't even about money. It was about feeling alive again. After our kids moved out, the house grew too quiet. The silence after dinner was heavy, like someone had turned down the volume on my life. So I started filling jars with wax and scents. Vanilla, lavender, cedarwood. Maybe, I thought, if I could create light in a jar, I could find some inside myself too. Mark, my husband, didn't really get it. He was the kind of man who measured worth in numbers. Promotions, salaries, quarterly bonuses. He'd been working in corporate finance for over 2 decades, proud of his title, his paycheck, and his pressed shirts that never seemed to wrinkle. When I told him about my idea, he smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that encourages. It was the polite kind people give to children, showing them something made out of popsicle sticks. "Candles, huh?" he said, tapping his coffee mug like a judge with a gavel. "Sweet. Maybe it'll keep you busy." I laughed it off, but inside it stung. Still, I didn't argue. I'd learned long ago that Mark's pride was as fragile as glass. So I kept quiet. I spent my evenings melting wax, testing scents, and experimenting with labels. The first few candles looked terrible, uneven, messy, like they'd survived an earthquake. But something about it felt right. I hadn't felt that spark, that tiny hum of purpose, in years. At night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, labeling jars by hand, while the soft crackle of a candle filled the room. The glow against the window reflected a version of me I almost didn't recognize. Someone content in her own company. Someone finding warmth where she once felt invisible. Mark didn't stop teasing. He'd make little jokes at dinner. "So, how's the empire coming along?" Or, "Sold enough candles to retire yet?" He thought it was harmless fun, but words can bruise even when they're dressed in humor. I smiled, nodded, and kept melting wax. The thing about quiet dreams is, they grow slowly, like ivy. You don't notice until one day they've taken over the wall. My first real order came from a neighbor, then another, and soon a local boutique asked if I could supply them for their gift section. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. Mark barely looked up from his laptop when I told him. "That's nice," he said, already halfway into an email. But later that night, when he asked if I could turn off the scent warmers because they made the house smell like a spa, something in me hardened a little. He thought I was playing at business, but deep down, I was rebuilding myself. And I didn't know it then. But the thing he mocked most would soon become the only thing keeping us from falling apart. Because sometimes life has a way of turning pride into irony. And Mark's laughter? It wouldn't last long. He thought it was cute, until life turned it into our only lifeline. Mark's teasing started small, playful, almost affectionate. But as my candle orders began to grow, the jokes turned sharper, heavier with something unspoken. Maybe he was threatened. Maybe he didn't like that my little hobby was earning more attention than expected. Whatever it was, it changed the air in our home. At dinner, he'd chuckle in that half-smile way of his. "Don't forget to pay your taxes." boss lady, he'd say, as if running a micro-business was something laughable. Or maybe one day you'll make enough to buy us dinner out. The words were light, but the tone wasn't. Each comment chipped away at something invisible between us: respect. I'd stay up late after he went to bed, pouring wax and sealing jars while the rest of the neighborhood slept. The soft hiss of melting wax became my therapy. Every flicker of flame whispered a reminder. You're building something. Keep going. During those nights, I realized something about marriage. You can live under the same roof and still be strangers. I was no longer trying to prove myself to him. I was trying to remember myself for me. When my small shop went online, things started changing faster than I could process. A lifestyle blogger featured my candles in her Support Small Businesses post, and suddenly I had more orders than I could handle. I should have been thrilled, and I was, but I kept it quiet. Mark didn't need to know how well it was doing. Not yet. Still, secrets have a way of revealing themselves. One Saturday morning, while I was packing boxes, he walked into the garage, coffee in hand, brows furrowed. "You've got all this going on? How much are you even making from this?" I told him the number. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. His eyebrows lifted, and then that smirk again. "Well," he said, "guess you can start paying half the bills then." It was a joke, but the kind that hides a bruise underneath. I felt it land. After that, his tone changed. He'd still mock me, but there was an edge of irritation behind it, like he didn't quite know whether to be proud or annoyed. He'd complain about the smell of wax, the boxes stacked in the garage, the clutter on the counter. "It's getting out of hand," he said once, waving at the rows of labeled jars. "You're turning our home into a factory." I almost told him, factories build futures, but I stayed quiet. Actual work. I smiled, swallowed the lump in my throat, and said nothing. But later that night, I couldn't sleep. His words replayed again and again, each repetition burning a little more. So I got up, lit one of my candles, cedarwood and bergamot, and sat alone in the glow. I realized then that I didn't need his validation anymore. It was strange, freeing, and terrifying all at once. Because deep down, I knew something he didn't. The ground beneath his confidence wasn't as solid as he thought. And when it cracked, and it would, my so-called little hobby would be the only thing still standing. The same man who laughed at my work would soon be begging me for one. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that starts with coffee and ends with news you never forget. Mark came home earlier than usual. His tie was loose, his jaw tight. He didn't speak as he walked in, just placed his briefcase on the table and sat down like someone had pulled the air out of him. I knew before he said a word. Some silences tell their own stories. "They let me go," he finally whispered, staring into his empty hands. Budget cuts. For a man who'd built his entire identity around his job, the fall was brutal. 20 years of service, gone in a single meeting. I wanted to comfort him, to remind him that life wasn't ending, just changing. But he didn't want comfort. He wanted control. And control had just slipped through his fingers. The following weeks were heavy with unspoken tension. Mark tried to act normal. Coffee, job applications, small talk. But I could see the pride cracking beneath the surface. His once confident stride turned slow. His nights stretched longer, his mornings later. Meanwhile, my little candle business, the one he'd always joked about, kept glowing brighter. Orders were steady. I'd begun working with 2 local stores, even received a bulk order for a wedding. It should have felt triumphant, but instead it felt complicated. Every time I printed a shipping label, guilt tugged at me. One evening, I gently suggested that maybe for now, my business could help cover a few bills. He froze. His face tightened. "You think I'm gonna live off candle money?" His voice was cold, sharp, the sound of pride fighting survival. I didn't argue. I just nodded, though my heart ached. Weeks turned to months. Job interviews came and went, with no offers. Mark's confidence shrank until even small talk felt foreign. He stopped laughing, stopped teasing. Sometimes, I'd find him sitting in the garage, staring at the shelves of candles, expression unreadable. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the growing distance, but part of me remembered every moment he dismissed me. Every smirk, every little hobby remark. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition, respect. And slowly, without either of us realizing, the roles began to reverse. My candles paid the grocery bills. They kept the lights on. They became the reason our house still felt like a home instead of a memory. He never said it out loud, but I could see the realization in his eyes that the same woman he once underestimated was now quietly keeping everything afloat. The man who once mocked my dreams was now watching them feed us. And though I didn't celebrate his fall, I couldn't deny the truth. Sometimes, life teaches humility through the very people we fail to value. By the time winter came, the rhythm of our household had shifted completely. The garage, once filled with laughter and mockery, had turned into the heartbeat of our survival. Shelves lined with glass jars, ribbons, and scent oils stood like quiet soldiers holding the line. Mark's job search slowed to a crawl. Every rejection email carved another crack into his pride. He stopped shaving every morning. His once bright shirts stayed folded in the closet. I tried to keep our conversations kind, but they always landed somewhere between tension and silence. Meanwhile, my orders grew beyond what I could handle alone. I'd spend hours at the table wrapping candles, printing invoices, organizing shipments. The work was exhausting, but it filled me with something deeper, purpose. One night, while I was packaging boxes late, Mark stood at the doorway watching me. His voice was softer than I'd heard in months. "You need help?" I paused. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to say no. Not out of spite, but fear. Fear of mixing old wounds with new beginnings. But something in his eyes looked different, quieter, humbled. So I nodded. "Sure, you can start with labeling." That night, something subtle shifted. We didn't talk much, but there was a strange peace in the silence. He worked slowly, carefully placing each label like it mattered. I noticed his hands. The same hands that used to type out reports and shake clients' hands, now folding boxes beside mine. In the days that followed, he began helping more, packing jars, organizing supplies, managing orders online. At first, it was awkward. I could feel his discomfort working under me. He'd hesitate before asking questions, his pride still learning to bend. But gradually, the air between us softened. For the first time, he saw what my work really was. Not a hobby, but a craft. He saw the care it took to balance fragrance and wax, the late nights spent perfecting each detail. One afternoon, he even said, almost to himself, "You're really good at this." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of his laughter from months ago. I just smiled and handed him another box. Because what I wanted wasn't for him to bow. It was for him to see. And in that quiet, humbling shift, something between us began to heal. Our roles had reversed, but not in the way people think. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about respect. He once believed success was measured in titles and paychecks. But now, as he packed another shipment and wiped sweat from his brow, I think he finally understood. Sometimes strength wears an apron instead of a suit. And as I looked at him working beside me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, life had burned us both down, so we could rebuild from the same flame. It's strange how quickly the definition of strength can change. A year ago, Mark believed power came from boardrooms, not back rooms, from corporate cards, not calloused hands. But now, every morning, he joined me in the garage, our unlikely office that smelled of wax, coffee, and redemption. He never called it working for me. Not at first. He'd say things like, "I'll help you with production today," or "We're running low on jars." But over time, the phrasing softened. One evening, while labeling a batch of lavender candles, he chuckled quietly and said, "Guess that makes you the boss now, huh?" I didn't answer. I just smiled. Because truthfully, I didn't want to be anyone's boss. I just wanted a partner who saw me as an equal. Those first few weeks of him working with me were awkward in ways I hadn't expected. He'd move slower, unsure of what to do. Sometimes, he'd ask questions he used to roll his eyes at. Once, when he accidentally overfilled a jar and spilled wax across the table, he cursed under his breath and looked embarrassed. I wiped it clean and said softly, "It's okay. I've made worse messes." It wasn't just wax we were cleaning. It was old wounds. Slowly, he began to see the business through my eyes. He started taking inventory, researching suppliers, even suggesting better packaging options. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with a friend saying, "Yeah, my wife runs a candle company. She's built something really solid." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just quiet pride. That night I cried, not from sadness, but from release. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Every late night, every hour I doubted myself, every joke he'd once made, all of it led here, to this moment of fragile, mutual respect. I noticed something else changing too. He smiled more, laughed again. The weight that had crushed him after losing his job began to lift, little by little, as he found purpose again. This time not from a title, but from teamwork. Sometimes, we'd sit on the porch after a long day, our fingers sticky from wax, the smell of sandalwood and vanilla drifting through the air. We'd watch the sun dip behind the trees, both too tired to talk, yet oddly content. I looked at him once and realized I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that had sat in my chest for months had melted, just like the wax we worked with every day. Maybe forgiveness, I thought, doesn't always come in grand gestures. It comes in quiet repetition, in working side by side until the past loses its sting. He once laughed at my dream. Now he lived inside it. And somewhere between his pride and my persistence, we found a new rhythm, one built not on who led or followed, but on who finally listened. By spring, the business had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We'd moved from the garage into a rented studio downtown, and my candles, our candles, sat proudly on the shelves of 3 local boutiques. Orders poured in faster than we could pour wax. For the first time in years, we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. But something more important had shifted beneath the surface. The power dynamic that once defined our marriage had quietly dissolved. The air between us felt different now, not heavy with tension, but alive with mutual understanding. One morning, as we prepared a new batch for shipment, Mark looked up and said, "You know, I used to think success meant control. Now I think it means peace." I smiled. It was the kind of sentence the old Mark would have never said out loud. Maybe humility had given him space to grow. Maybe watching me build something from nothing had changed the way he saw strength. Still, I knew that this wasn't just about candles. It was about identity, about finding my voice after years of whispering. I wasn't the same woman who started melting wax in a corner for comfort. I was someone who had built light out of loneliness, purpose out of pain. There was a day, not long after our business reached its first major milestone, when a reporter from a local magazine came to interview me. They wanted to feature women over 50 redefining success. Mark sat quietly as the photographer took my picture, smiling proudly but silently. When the article came out, I found him reading it in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up and said, "You deserve every word." For a moment, I saw him not as the man who mocked me, or even the man who lost everything, but as someone who had finally learned to see. We still had disagreements, of course. Old habits don't vanish overnight, but they no longer cut as deep. The laughter in our home sounded different now, freer, real. He'd still tease me sometimes, calling me the CEO of Wax and Wicks, but now it was filled with warmth, not condescension. I began to realize that empowerment doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through patience. Sometimes it rebuilds quietly inside the same walls where you once felt small. One evening, as we closed up the studio, I stood by the window, watching the glow of candlelight dance against the glass. Mark came up behind me, rested his hand on my shoulder, and said, "You were right, you know." I turned to him, half smiling. "About what?" He paused. "That small things, small dreams, can save us." It wasn't an apology, but it didn't need to be. It was truth. And for me, that was enough. I realized then that the real victory wasn't that he worked for me or that I proved him wrong. It was that I no longer needed his validation to feel whole. The light I'd built had finally reached both of us. He once mocked what he couldn't understand, until it became the reason we survived. Looking back now, I realize that the journey wasn't just about candles or business or even Mark. It was about learning to see myself for the first time in decades. About recognizing that the quiet, patient work we do in the corners of our lives, the things that nobody notices, can have the most profound impact. When I first started pouring wax in that corner of the garage, I was invisible in my own home. I had spent years being a wife, a mother, a caretaker, blending into the background of someone else's life. The world saw me, but not really me. And sometimes, that hurts more than any harsh word ever could. Mark's laughter stung, yes. His mockery cut deeper than he ever knew. But it also forced me to find something stronger than approval. I realized that validation isn't given. It's claimed quietly, in persistence, in belief, and in the stubborn refusal to shrink. Each candle I poured, each order I packed, each label I attached was my declaration. I exist, I matter, and I am capable. The irony of life is remarkable. The man who once dismissed my dreams was now standing beside me, humbled and learning to respect them. Watching him work under me, seeing his hands roughen over candle jars, observing his slow realization that what I built was real. It was humbling for both of us. I learned that power isn't about titles or dominance. It's about perseverance, resilience, and the quiet fire you nurture in yourself. I think that's the part most people don't see, the transformation that happens inside. It isn't loud. There are no parades, no trophies, no congratulations. Just a woman waking up every day, choosing to honor herself, to carve meaning out of the ordinary, and to keep moving forward when the world doubts her. I also learned something important about love and marriage. Respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned and observed. And sometimes the strongest relationships are forged in the furnace of struggle, when pride is stripped away and both people are forced to confront their weaknesses. Mark and I had to walk that uncomfortable path together, learning to see one another not as competitors or critics, but as partners. To women who are listening now, especially those who feel overlooked, underestimated, or silenced, here's what I've realized. Your small dreams are not small. The work you do quietly, the passion you nurture in the shadows, can carry you through the most unexpected storms. You are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and more capable than anyone has ever told you. I've come to understand that life doesn't always hand you respect or recognition. Sometimes it takes losing, failing, or being doubted for you to finally stand in your own light. And when that happens, it's not just about surviving. It's about awakening. So, when I light one of my candles now, I see more than wax and flame. I see a woman who refused to be silenced, who built a world out of her own hands, who turned mockery into motivation. I see the power in resilience, the beauty in perseverance, and the quiet joy of a life reclaimed. Sometimes the people who doubted you the most become witnesses to your strength. And sometimes the smallest light you create is enough to illuminate the path for both of you.